Hezbollah, supported by Iran, they say is far more powerful than Hamas. Enia Krivine is the senior director of the Israel program at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. And Enia, it was fascinating. I listened to that speech today. Hezbollah saying they didn't know about the October 7th attack, but they liked what they saw. Does Hezbollah share the goal of Hamas to eliminate Israel and all Jews from the face of the earth?
Thank you. I watched the speech too. I also thought it was fascinating. Hezbollah and Hamas have a lot of similarities. They're both terror organizations, both designated in the U.S., both inspired by the regime in Tehran, both exist to destroy Israel, have the blood of many Americans on their hands, and they've both fought multiple wars with Israel. However, as you pointed out, Hezbollah is not all in yet. And in watching that speech, I was thinking to myself how de-escalatory it actually was. A lot of us who are watching this conflict had all eyes on Nasrallah today, wondering if he was going to make an indication that Hezbollah would in fact get into this war in a real way. And all indications right now point to that he won't. Now, Israel's not going to take him at his word. Obviously, they've been surprised once in this conflict, and I don't think that they are going to allow to be attacked with an element of surprise again. But certainly in speech, he was very de-escalatory and doesn't seem to want to get in this war in a real way right now.
It is my understanding that his hands may be tied and that there are moderates in Lebanon who also don't want to join this fight. Does Hezbollah want a wider war?
So if it wanted one, it certainly had its moment on October 7th to get involved when Israel was caught with such a massive intelligence failure. So it seems to me that Hezbollah does not want that right now. As far as moderates in Lebanon, Hezbollah does not control the country, does not control Lebanon in the way that Hamas controls Gaza. Hamas runs the Gaza Strip. It has done for over a decade, and it is the regime in charge there. Hezbollah has to balance, has a balancing act with other players in Lebanon. It is not the majority. It has an outsized influence on the government, but it is not the sole player. And Hezbollah knows that getting into an all-out war with Israel right now might send Lebanon into the abyss. It's already teetering on complete collapse. It's in a complete state of financial meltdown. And the effects of a full-out war, not only the damage to the infrastructure that one could anticipate, but also the massive movement of refugees from southern Lebanon could potentially have disastrous effects for Lebanon. So yes, I agree. I think that to some extent, his hands are tied.
Enia, there was a split-screen moment on televisions today. There was the leader of Hezbollah speaking. At the same time, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was speaking today as well. I want you to listen to what he had to say.
We have been very clear from the outset that we're determined that there not be a second or third front opened in this conflict. President Biden said on day one to anyone thinking of opening a second front, taking advantage of the situation, don't.
Ask if Hezbollah wanted to get involved in this war. Does Israel want Hezbollah involved? Specifically, does the United States want Hezbollah involved? And can Israel win in a conflict with Hezbollah to the north and Hamas to the south?
I think Israel is playing offense right now, and it does not want to play defense in the north. Obviously, if you are fighting a war, it's easier to fight on one front and allow to focus your efforts on one front. Having a two-front war is less optimal for Israel. However, Israel has evacuated hundreds of thousands of people from their homes. They have called up a massive reservist force, and it is an unsustainable situation in the long term for Israel with this many people out of their homes. And I can tell you that right now, people do not feel safe in the north of the country. They're looking down, they're seeing what happened to the Israeli residents of the south. They're seeing the massacres and the atrocities that occurred there. And they're thinking to themselves, well, this could be me, this could be my family. So until Israel establishes a new deterrence with Hezbollah in the north, until its people feel comfortable going back to those communities, going back to those farms, taking their families back to that part of the country, Israel has a problem on its hands, and it will eventually have to establish a new modus vivendi with Hezbollah. Now, does it want to do that today? No. I'm sure it would rather focus on one front. Having the American carrier strike groups and assets in the Mediterranean and in the Red Sea are obviously very reassuring for Israel. But again, it is in a state right now with over probably 350 internally displaced people. And in order for those people to go home, and they're
responsible, as you know, for one of the worst attacks in Marine Corps history. That is when the barracks in Beirut were bombed in 1983, 241 Marines dying. How short is the U.S. fuse, this country's fuse, when it comes to any strikes against Hezbollah and a wider war?
I think that President Biden and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken reiterated this today. I think their number one priority right now is that this does not turn into a wider war. I think it is the last thing that President Biden wants. He's focused elsewhere. There's a war in Ukraine. There are mounting tensions with China. I think the last thing he wants to do is get involved in yet another conflict in the Middle East. So he's made it crystal clear to the Israelis, to the Lebanese, to Hezbollah, to all of the players in the region, don't. The question is whether they are deterred by Israel or by the U.S. presence. We also know that there's been an escalation in the region of attacks on U.S. troops. That, to me, is an indication that they are not deterred. So we'll see how it plays out. And Biden has made his priorities clear. He does not want a regional escalation.
30 seconds left. 100 to 150,000 missiles from Hezbollah could possibly rain down on Israel. Is the Iron Dome system capable of handling a barrage that large? And if so, what happens to cities like Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and other places in Israel?
Iron Dome is not equipped to deal with that intensity of rockets. Hezbollah has the capacity to fire several thousand a day. But it's not the dumb rockets, these statistical rockets that have a trajectory of a couple dozens of kilometers that worry Israel. It's their precision-guided missiles that worry Israel. Israel's a small country. It's the size of New Jersey. It has limited critical infrastructure sites, and the precision-guided missiles that Hezbollah has in its arsenal, several hundred last I heard, those do pose a true threat to Israel. It's unclear how effective Iron Dome would be on an onslaught of dumb rockets, right? The statistical rockets that are not position-guided. It's very unclear how Iron Dome would respond to these precision-guided rockets that are controlled by GPS and move in midair. So if Israel is one thing, if the Israeli war planners have one thing that's keeping them up at night right now, it's those precision-guided missiles and the several hundred in Hezbollah's arsenal.
We began our last hour by saying Friday is a day of prayer for both Muslims and Jews. You can only hope they are doing that more so than planning for the next battles. Enia Krivine, thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Up next, is it worth it? To find out this year's Rock and Roll